Hey everyone. I just wanted to make a short presentation and talk to you a little bit about observations this week. I know hopefully a lot of you guys seem really excited about going into the field and starting this process, but I wanted to share a little bit of advice and remind you of a few things that some of the reading will go over, but I just wanted to talk through a couple things first before you go out and start doing your observations officially. So I'm going to talk through this presentation, and I've called it Advice for Observations or How to Enter the Field Somewhat Prepared for the Unexpected. One of the things you have to realize when you're going in and doing any kind of field work is that you can prepare for it as best as you can, and you can visit it in advance and talk to people in advance, but you just can't fully prepare for what's going to happen. And so that's kind of the fun of it as well, is you never really know exactly what you're going to get, and you have to be kind of aware of that and open and flexible about it as well. And so just as I'm asking you guys to enter the field that way and be that way, I, as your instructor, will also be that way. So keep open communication with me and let me know when things are going well or when things are going not well, or if something unexpected happens. First of all, I want to let you guys know that I read through all of your journal entries on choosing a subculture, and I think you guys have some great ideas for this, for your research this semester. I let you know pretty straightforwardly whether or not I thought your subculture was going to work, and if there was anything missing or I had any concerns, I asked you to please email me and let me know what's going on. So be in touch with me if you got one of those messages. If not, I think you guys are ready to really move forward. But I did want to offer a little bit of advice in terms of, now that you've got your subculture, how to really move forward with your research. First of all, a lot of you need to think about how you might get specific. So a subculture should be a smaller, more specific group, meaning that you want to differentiate it from cultures or larger cultures. So I'm going to take an example that several people have been talking about using as their subculture, the subculture of hipsters, and talk through that a little bit. So here's me trying to narrow this topic. So we could start with hipsters, more broadly thinking, and then we could think about an age group of hipsters, so maybe millennial generation hipsters, so people in your generation and my generation also. I'm technically part of the millennials as well. We could think about hipsters in the state of Texas, which are different from hipsters maybe in California. Then we could look specifically at Houston hipsters, thinking that maybe hipsters in Houston would be different than what we'd consider hipsters in Austin. Then we might get even more narrow and think about hipsters in a particular neighborhood. We might even think about hipsters that gather at a certain location. Okay, I don't want to make too many assumptions here, but I have gone to the Black Hole Coffee Shop several times, and I do feel like there's a very particular kind of hipster that hangs out there generally. Not the only kind of person that hangs out there, but my idea of what a hipster is seems to be met by some of the people there. So here you can see how we took a very broad, large subculture and narrowed it down in lots of different ways. And I'm not saying you have to end up with your subculture connected to one particular location, but it is an option, and this does give you an idea of how much you can narrow your subculture down. Second, you want to think about why you're writing about this subculture instead of something else. What is it about this subculture that you think is worth investing your time and energy on this semester? Like I mentioned before, you want to pick a subculture you're really interested in, because you're going to be spending the next 13 or so weeks researching and writing about it. So first you want to think about the question, so what and who cares? What does knowledge about this subculture have to offer us? Why do you care? Why should somebody else care? Why should somebody else want to learn about this subculture? And I think I've already mentioned this. Why is a subculture worth studying? And so I think that when you actually go through the process of selecting your subculture, there are particular reasons why you're doing that, that answer these questions. And even if you're not sure how to articulate that yet, that's okay. But you need to keep it in the back of your mind. And by the time you're writing your first larger paper, Project 1, you need to be ready to make this argument. Okay, now I'm going to start talking a little bit about before, during, and after you observe. So first, before you observe, be sure to do some background research on your subculture. The best way to prepare yourself is to get as much information about the subculture you're going into as you can beforehand. Not only is this important so that when you go in, you kind of can pick up on how things tend to happen there, but also because it's a way of showing your respect and your interest in the subculture. So if you can show somebody that you meet there that you have some kind of awareness about how that subculture operates, they're going to appreciate that. I had one of my instructors always tell me that you can either, be an insider of a culture or you can be an outsider. And one of the biggest benefits of the outsider is being somebody who's very curious and somebody who wants to learn about it. So if you position yourself as somebody who's try to get as much information as you can, but you're still very curious about what's going on, that's going to position you really well. Second, you want to make sure that you choose the right field site. Now, I do have to pause here and just mention that I know this is a lot. These are a lot of decisions, and they seem like they can be pretty tough and complicated. And I'm just going to share a little secret with you. If it was up to me, we would be spending the entire semester doing just this kind of fieldwork research. You'd be picking a field site, we'd be spending lots of time on that decision, you'd be doing multiple observations, multiple interviews over, several weeks. However, since the expectations and the requirements for this course kind of require that we also look into academic or scholarly kinds of secondary research that you can find through the library databases, we really don't have time to just focus solely on primary field research. So as you're doing this, I want you to keep in mind that we're going to spend the first unit doing this kind of research. We're going to spend some time in the second unit doing more secondary kinds of research. But then in the third unit, when you get to design your own research project, if you want to really stick with the fieldwork, if that's what you really liked, you can feel free to do that. And you can kind of spend the entire semester collecting that kind of data if you'd like. And you can follow the fieldwork as your primary method of research if you'd like. So I just wanted to let you guys know that I recognize I'm asking you to do a lot of complicated things in not so much time, and I do wish we had more time. That being said, I do think that, some degree of time should be put into figuring out what your field site should be. So once you've identified your subculture, I think you should really focus on trying to look locally. So either something in Houston or in the particular neighborhood or community that you live in, somewhere where you can go and visit, where people in the subculture gather or spend a lot of time. You might attend an event that's taking place somewhere. And you also might think about online spaces and online communities as a field site. And that's one way to really kind of localize a larger subculture, as well as to find an online space where that community or that subculture gathers. Third, you want to consider your assumptions and expectations before you go into the field site and to explore the subculture. You want to think about what your ideas are already and what your expectations are. And then you need to spend a little time realizing that you might be wrong. Your assumptions might be limiting you. You might experience a lot of unexpected things. And it's important to have the right attitude when you go into the subculture to prepare you not to necessarily find what you expect. So that takes a little bit of opening your mind up. And I think the best way to really come to terms with these are through your own writing, and the first entry of the journal for this unit will help you do some of this. Fourth, you want to think about your position in relation to your subculture. This kind of follows from number 3. You want to think about whether you consider yourself an insider, an outsider, somebody who's interested in joining and participating in this community, somebody who someday wants to join it, or maybe even somebody who's had bad experiences with the subculture. It's really important for you to think carefully about that. Something else, 2 more things I do want to mention at this point too. First, some of you guys are thinking about focusing on subcultures that are identified with labels that can be seen as problematic, as offensive. So for example, one of those I think would be hipster. For example, I told this story on one of the discussion boards. When I first learned about the term when I was an undergrad, I didn't realize how offensive it was to be called that. So I made a comment to a friend of a friend and just, made maybe a comment. I think he was wearing one of those necklaces with those really thick beads. I don't know. I used to make necklaces with them all the time when I was little, and I made some comment about it, and he got really offended and didn't talk to me again that night or any other occasion. And I had no idea that was so offensive. So you have to think really carefully about how you're labeling people, and if you might want to approach the subculture with a different kind of terminology. For example, if you want to, explore the subculture of hipsters, you might just say, hey, I'm just interested in looking at people who are part of the millennial generation or something like that. That way you're still including hipsters, but you're not using a label that it comes off as offensive. And I think there are several others of you guys that have even more complicated labels, and I'd be happy to talk to you about those individually and how to rethink about your subculture a little bit so you're not using labels that could turn some people off. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Something else I want you to think about in relation to your position is how straightforward you want to be about the work that you're doing. So you definitely want to either be doing your observation in a public place where, or observing a public event where you can kind of sit and you're not bothering anyone. For example, if you're going to do an ethnographic observation, again, let's use a hipster example, of hipsters, and you wanted to go to a coffee shop, or maybe there's a venue, or maybe there's a park where you think you can see this subculture. You could go and you can sit and you can do that observation without really interrupting the activities there, without really doing something that's intrusive. That's one thing you really want to be careful about when you're observing, is you don't want to intrude. But if you're, say, some of you guys want to do Greek life or particular sororities as your subculture, if that's the case, you do need to kind of, even if you're part of the sorority or in an insider there, you still need to think about asking permission or explaining, hey, do you mind if I take some notes, or do you mind if I sit in on this meeting with the officers to get an idea of what's going on? In those cases, you do need to explain what you're trying to do and be pretty upfront with your position. That being said, I think in sorority meetings, if you wanted to do an observation, you wouldn't necessarily have to tell people you were doing it. I'm thinking of my own experiences actually, and how nobody would have really known whether or not I was doing some sort of observation or not in that situation. But you do really want to be careful and protect the privacy of the people and the subculture. And if you have concerns or questions about that, again, I'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one. And I forgot I had this one on here. Number 5, gain permission if necessary. Like I just said, if you feel like you might in any way interrupt what's already going on, then that probably means that you need to talk to somebody who's part of that subculture and make sure that it's okay for you to be there, for you to observe. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about field notes and the different ways that you can do those. So the first method that I really wanted to share with you guys and that I've provided a template for under the Tuesday materials for this week is a double entry journal. And the way that that works is basically on the left side you have what you observe, you have what's going on or what people in the subculture are saying. You can kind of see that this example is created to be something that you do when you're reading a text, and it can work with that as well. But we want to think about it in terms of observation. So, so you would write on the left side everything that you actually see or witness, and then on the right side you would write your reaction, what you're thinking about, what questions you have, any kind of directly interpretive stuff would go on the right side. And if you want to see a good example of what this looks like in field research, you can look at the topic and subculture, I believe that's the name of the PDF, not the observing one, but the other one, I believe has a really good example of what the double entry journal can look like. Alternatively, you can take field notes in any kind of way. You can just take notes. This person's doing vertically and horizontally. This is a terrible vision. I'm just saying now when it's blown up, but you might include images. Some people include maps and things like that. And I want to take this moment and say, especially to kind of test if you're paying attention, if you want to do your field notes in a different way other than the double entry journal, that's fine. As long as you, for your entry 2 in the journal this week, take a picture of that, or you save that, or you share that. The other thing I think is really important is to differentiate between what you're seeing and hearing and experiencing and what your perception is. So the double entry journal allows you to do that. But you might find another way that works better for you. You might be really good at using symbols or shorthand. You might decide that you want to spend all of your time just trying to observe and writing down details and then doing your reflection and interpretation after that. Experiment a little bit with what you think will work best for you. Okay. During the observation, once you're already there, I'm going to give you some ideas about what to pay attention to. First, there are 3 big aspects of a subculture field site that you want to notice. First, you want to think about the place, the physical location. What exactly do you see? Again, like I mentioned, you could do this through mapping. You can show up before an event or just in a space before any people of the subculture are there and just describe it. Second, people, you want to pay attention to who's there, the human interaction that's taking place, what people are saying to one another, how they respond to each other, what kind of language they share, and how they kind of view you as well. And then finally, events. And these may or may not officially be taking place at your field site. But you do want to pay attention to any kind of organized gathering. Anytime there's somebody telling a story or making a speech, you'll notice in one of the video examples posted under Tuesday, there's a video of somebody who's doing an ethnographic project of Occupy Wall Street. And in that, he has positioned he's done a great job showing the kind of background research you should really do before you go in to a subculture. But then he's also interviewing people, putting that together with clips of people making speeches and things like that. And he's also got an organized march on there. So all those sorts of things are important to the happenings of that subculture. And he made sure to include those as events. A couple other things to keep in mind for good solid field notes. As much as you can, every set of good field notes should have these things. So first, the date, the time, the place, and specific facts. For example, if you want to note how many people are there, or an appointment you had and what time somebody shows up, what time an event is scheduled to start and then actually starts. Those kinds of facts are really important because they might be used to kind of help you understand how the subculture works later. You also want to have sensory impressions: sight, sound, texture, smells, tastes. Many of these as you can write down. You want to be able to create a scene or a sketch later in your writing so that we get a sense of what it's like to be in the field. Third, you want to note specific words that people say. Again, you can tell so much about a subculture by the kind of language that's used. It'll also give you an idea of maybe some questions you might ask in an interview later if you hear some words or some people talking you don't understand. That might be an indication of some kind of insider language that you want to ask about later. You also want to note any questions for future observations and interviews. You're going to be hearing it over and over again this semester. You want to always be thinking about what you're learning, what you know. You want to reflect on that knowledge, and then you always want to keep asking and pushing for more questions. So, especially after an observation, that can lead you to all kinds of different questions you might either keep in mind next time you observe, or you might think about when you schedule an interview with somebody. Finally, again, I already mentioned this, but most importantly, you want to be sure somehow during the observation in your field notes that you separate your words, thoughts, and ideas from those of the subculture. You don't want to confuse them. And it can be easy to do if you're not using some sort of technique to keep those separate. Finally, after the observation and as soon as possible, so as soon as you've left and gotten home, or as closely, or maybe even immediately, after you've, been observing, say you go somewhere, you spend 30 minutes or an hour observing, and then, you're stopping. You want to do some of these things. First, review your field notes. You want to look back on what you said, make sure you can understand. If you can't, maybe make a note to go back and double check something. And then if you have gaps or you forgot to add something, go ahead and put that in there. You want to reflect on your experience. Like I said, you want to think about those questions you have. You want to think about maybe how your assumptions have changed, what tensions you notice, things like that. And again, you want to think of more questions that you have that you want to continue using to explore the subculture. So that concludes my advice about observations. Please, if you have questions or concerns before, during, or after your observation, please email me. Again, this is a little hard for me because I can't always tell from your writing whether you're feeling confident or nervous, or, if you feel like you want more one-on-one attention. You've got to be really straightforward with me, and feel free to respond in the journal, but if you want an immediate response, send me an email and we can either talk that way or set up a time to talk on the phone, or meet in the Blackboard site. And remember, most importantly, have fun. I think this is some of the most exciting kind of research that you can do, and I hope you guys are all looking forward to it. I can't wait to see what you guys find out.